Chapter 1. Happiness is the most desired state in human life, yet it remains the most misunderstood. Every person, regardless of background, intelligence, or status, is moving toward the same invisible goal. Some chase it through wealth. Others search for it in relationships, recognition, or personal achievement. Some believe it lies in freedom, others in stability. But beneath all these different paths, the intention is the same: to feel at peace, to feel fulfilled, to feel whole. And yet, despite this universal pursuit, most people spend their lives feeling that happiness is always just slightly out of reach. They experience moments of joy, brief flashes of satisfaction, but those moments fade quickly. What remains is a subtle sense that something is missing, something incomplete, something that still needs to be achieved before life can truly feel right. This feeling becomes the silent driver of human behavior. It pushes people to work harder, to compete more, to constantly improve their circumstances. On the surface, this looks like ambition, and in many ways it is. But beneath ambition often lies a deeper belief, rarely spoken but strongly felt: the belief that happiness exists somewhere in the future. This belief shapes the way people live. They tell themselves that once they reach a certain milestone, they will finally relax. Once they earn enough money, they will feel secure. Once they find the right partner, they will feel complete. Once they achieve recognition, they will feel worthy. So life becomes a series of conditions. If this happens, then I will be happy. But there is a hidden danger in this way of thinking. Because the moment one condition is fulfilled, another quietly replaces it. A student believes happiness will come after graduation. After graduation, it shifts to getting a job, then to getting a better job, then to earning more, then to building a family, then to securing the future. The target keeps moving, and with it, the promise of happiness keeps shifting further away. This creates a cycle that feels like progress, but often leads to exhaustion. The mind becomes trained to live in anticipation rather than presence. It learns to delay satisfaction, always projecting it into the future. And as a result, even when good things happen, they are not fully experienced. They are acknowledged, briefly appreciated, and then replaced by the next concern. This is why many people feel strangely empty even after achieving what they once deeply desired. It is not because their achievements are meaningless. It is because their relationship with achievement is flawed. They expected a permanent emotional state from a temporary outcome. But no external event, no matter how significant, can create lasting happiness on its own. The human mind does not work that way. It adapts. This adaptation is one of the most powerful and least understood forces shaping your experience of life. Whatever you repeatedly experience, your mind begins to treat as normal. What once felt extraordinary slowly becomes ordinary. What once brought excitement becomes expected. This is why the first success feels intense, but the 10th feels routine. This is why your first salary feels like freedom, but over time, it becomes insufficient. This is why even major life milestones eventually lose their emotional intensity. Adaptation is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism. It allows human beings to remain functional in changing environments. But when applied to happiness, it creates a problem. It makes external sources unreliable. If every achievement eventually becomes normal, then no achievement can provide lasting fulfillment. And if you rely only on external factors for happiness, you will always be dependent on something that cannot sustain you. This is where most people get trapped. They double down on the same strategy. If one achievement did not bring lasting happiness, they assume a bigger one will. If one level of success was not enough, They aim for a higher level. They keep increasing the scale of their goals, hoping that eventually something will feel permanent. But the pattern does not change, because the issue is not the size of the achievement. The issue is the expectation attached to it. Happiness cannot be built on conditions that are constantly changing. It requires a different foundation. To understand this, you have to look inward, because the true barriers to happiness are not outside you. They are within you. Comparison is one of the strongest. The moment you compare your life to someone else's, your sense of satisfaction weakens. Even if you are doing well, there will always be someone doing better. There will always be someone with more wealth, more success, more recognition. If your happiness depends on being ahead, you will rarely feel at peace. Fear is another. Fear of failure. Fear of rejection. Fear of loss. These fears shape decisions in subtle ways. They limit risk-taking, suppress authenticity, and create constant mental tension. Even when nothing is wrong, the mind prepares for something to go wrong. Then there is attachment. The belief that certain things, people, or outcomes are necessary for your happiness. This creates emotional dependence. When those things are present, you feel good. When they are absent or threatened, you feel unstable. And finally, there is the ego, the part of you that constantly seeks validation, that wants to be seen, recognized, respected. The ego is never satisfied. It compares, it competes, it demands. And in doing so, it keeps your mind in a state of restlessness. These internal forces operate continuously, often without your awareness. They shape how you interpret reality. Two people can experience the same situation and feel completely different, not because the situation is different, but because their internal frameworks are different. One sees opportunity, the other sees risk. One feels gratitude, the other feels lack. One remains calm, the other becomes anxious. The difference is not in the world. The difference is in perception. And perception is shaped by the mind. This is the point where the understanding of happiness begins to shift. Instead of trying to control every external factor, you begin to recognize the importance of your internal state. Instead of asking how to change your life to feel better, you start asking how to change the way you experience your life. This is not about ignoring reality or pretending everything is perfect. It is about developing the ability to remain stable regardless of circumstances. Because true happiness is not the absence of problems. It is the ability to maintain clarity and balance even when problems exist. Life will always be uncertain. There will always be challenges, setbacks, unexpected events. If your happiness depends on everything going according to plan, you will constantly feel disturbed. But if your happiness is rooted internally, external changes lose their power over you. This is what makes happiness an art. It is not automatic. It is not accidental. It requires awareness, practice, and discipline. It requires you to observe your thoughts, question your beliefs, and gradually reshape your mental patterns. This process takes time. But it is the only process that leads to something real. Because once you begin to understand your own mind, you stop being controlled by it. You stop reacting automatically. You create space between what happens and how you respond. And in that space, something important emerges. Freedom. The freedom to choose your perspective. The freedom to not be overwhelmed by every thought. The freedom to experience life without constantly chasing something more. This is where happiness starts to become stable. Not because life becomes perfect, but because your relationship with life becomes healthier. You begin to appreciate without clinging. You begin to strive without depending. You begin to live without constantly postponing your peace. And that changes everything. Because for the first time, happiness is no longer something you are waiting for. It becomes something you are building from within. Chapter 2. Most people spend their lives believing that happiness is something they will feel once they get what they want. This belief is not random. It is built slowly, reinforced by society, education, media, and observation. You grow up watching people celebrate achievements. You see happiness attached to success, wealth, recognition, and milestones. You begin to associate positive emotions with external outcomes, and over time, this association becomes unquestioned truth. If I get this, I will be happy. If I reach that level, I will feel complete. If I achieve enough, I will finally relax. This way of thinking seems logical. It gives direction, motivation, and a sense of purpose. It creates movement. But hidden within it is a structural problem that quietly shapes your entire emotional life. It assumes that desire has an endpoint. But desire does not end, it evolves. The moment you achieve something, your mind recalibrates. What once felt important becomes normal. What once felt like a dream becomes expectation. And once something becomes expected, it loses its emotional intensity. This process happens so quickly that most people do not even notice it. A student dreams of getting into a university. When it happens, the excitement lasts for a short time. Then new concerns appear. Performance, competition, future plans. The original achievement fades into the background. A person works hard to earn a higher income. When they finally reach that level, their lifestyle adjusts. Their expenses increase. Their social comparisons shift. Suddenly, what once felt like financial freedom now feels like maintenance. This pattern repeats across every domain of life. It is not a coincidence. It is a function of how the human mind operates. The mind is designed to adapt. Adaptation is what allows human beings to survive changing environments. It prevents you from being overwhelmed by constant stimulation. But it also creates a side effect. It makes external achievements emotionally temporary. No matter how big the success is, your mind will eventually normalize it. This creates a paradox. You can keep improving your external life, but your internal experience does not improve at the same rate. You gain more, but you do not necessarily feel better. This is where confusion begins. Because from the outside, everything looks like progress. Better job, better income, better lifestyle, more recognition. But internally, something feels unchanged. Or, in some cases, even more restless. This leads to a dangerous conclusion that many people adopt without realizing it. They assume they have not achieved enough, so they increase the scale of their goals. If this level of success did not bring lasting happiness, maybe a higher level will. Maybe more money, more status, more achievement will finally create the feeling they are searching for. But the pattern does not change, because the issue is not the size of the goal. The issue is the expectation attached to it. You are expecting a permanent emotional state from a temporary external condition. And that expectation is impossible to fulfill. This does not mean achievements are meaningless. They have value. They improve your quality of life. They provide opportunities. They create experiences. But they cannot serve as the foundation of your happiness, because they are unstable. They depend on variables that are constantly changing. Economic conditions shift. Relationships evolve. Health fluctuates. Opportunities appear and disappear. Even your own priorities change over time. If your happiness is tied to things that are unstable, your emotional state will also be unstable. This is why many people feel a constant low-level anxiety, even when things are going well. They are aware, consciously or unconsciously, that what they have can change, and that awareness creates tension. They try to secure everything, control everything, maintain everything. But the more they try to control external conditions, the more they realize how little control they actually have. This creates pressure, and pressure is the opposite of peace. At this point, many people turn to pleasure as a solution. Pleasure is immediate. It is accessible. It provides a quick shift in emotional state. It can come from entertainment, food, social media, validation, or any form of stimulation that temporarily distracts the mind. For a moment, it works. The mind feels lighter. The tension decreases. The sense of dissatisfaction fades, but only temporarily. Because pleasure does not resolve the underlying structure. It only interrupts it. Once the stimulation ends, the mind returns to its previous state. And often, it returns with more intensity, because now it has experienced contrast. This creates a cycle. Discomfort leads to seeking pleasure. Pleasure provides temporary relief. Relief fades, and discomfort returns. So, the search for pleasure continues. Over time, this cycle becomes automatic. You begin to rely on external stimulation, not just for enjoyment, but for emotional regulation. You are no longer choosing pleasure. You are depending on it. This dependency weakens your ability to remain stable without constant input. And without stability, happiness cannot sustain. Because happiness is not about constant highs. It is about a consistent sense of balance. This is where a shift becomes necessary. Instead of asking, "What do I need to get to feel happy?" you begin to ask a different question. Why do I feel incomplete even when I have enough? This question changes the direction of your focus. It moves your attention from the external world to your internal state. And when you start observing your internal state, you begin to notice patterns. You notice how quickly satisfaction fades. You notice how often your mind compares your life to others. You notice how frequently you think about what is missing rather than what is present. You notice how your thoughts move automatically toward problems, even when there is no immediate threat. These patterns are not random. They are conditioned. Your mind has been trained over years to operate in a certain way. It has learned to focus on lack, to anticipate problems, to seek improvement continuously. These tendencies were useful in survival contexts. But in modern life, they often create unnecessary dissatisfaction. Because even when your basic needs are met, your mind continues to search for what is wrong. If you do not become aware of this, you will always feel like something is missing. Not because something is actually missing, but because your mind is designed to perceive it that way. This is why two people in the same situation can feel completely different. One feels content. The other feels deprived. The difference is not in what they have. The difference is in how they interpret what they have. And interpretation is something that can be changed. This is where real progress begins. When you stop trying to fix your emotional state by constantly changing your external circumstances, and instead start understanding the internal mechanisms that create your experience. This requires honesty, because it is easier to believe that happiness is outside you. It is easier to think that you just need more time, more money, better conditions. It is harder to accept that the issue may be in the way your mind is functioning. But once you accept it, you gain something powerful. You gain influence over your own experience. Because if your unhappiness is created internally, it means it can also be changed internally. And this does not require extreme changes. It starts with simple awareness, noticing your thoughts without immediately reacting to them, recognizing when your mind is comparing, observing when you are chasing something, not because it truly matters, but because you believe it will fix how you feel. This awareness creates distance, and in that distance, you begin to see clearly. You begin to understand that happiness is not something that suddenly appears when everything goes right. It is something that gradually develops when you stop depending on everything to go right. This is the shift, from dependency to independence, from chasing to understanding, from reacting to observing. And once this shift begins, your relationship with desire changes. You still have goals. You still pursue improvement, but you are no longer emotionally dependent on the outcome. You can work hard without feeling incomplete. You can achieve without becoming attached. You can enjoy without becoming dependent. This creates a different kind of experience. One where progress does not come at the cost of peace. One where ambition does not create anxiety. One where you are not constantly waiting for life to finally feel right. Because instead of trying to reach happiness through external means, you are building it from within. And that is the only way it lasts. Chapter 3. If happiness does not come from constantly achieving more, then the question becomes unavoidable. What actually creates it? This is where the search begins to turn inward, and for many people, this is the most difficult shift to make. Looking outward is easy. You can measure progress, compare results, and follow visible paths. But looking inward requires something entirely different. It requires awareness, honesty, and the willingness to confront patterns that have been running silently for years. Most people are not fully aware of how their own mind operates. They experience thoughts, but they do not examine them. They feel emotions, but they do not question them. They react to situations, but they do not analyze why they reacted in that way. This creates a condition where life feels automatic, almost mechanical. You wake up, think in familiar patterns, respond in predictable ways, and repeat behaviors that feel natural but are often unexamined. Days pass, then years, and the same emotional cycles continue. This is what it means to live unconsciously. Not in the sense of being unaware of the world, but in the sense of being unaware of your internal processes. Your mind generates thoughts continuously. Many of these thoughts are influenced by past experiences, fears, expectations, and social conditioning. They are not always accurate reflections of reality, but they feel real because they appear in your mind. And because they feel real, you believe them. A negative thought appears, and you accept it without question. A fear arises, and you treat it as a warning. A doubt forms, and you assume it is truth. This automatic acceptance gives your thoughts a level of authority they do not deserve. Over time, these unexamined thoughts begin to shape your identity. You start to believe that you are your thoughts. If your mind repeatedly tells you that you are not good enough, you begin to feel inadequate. If it tells you that others are doing better than you begin to feel behind. If it constantly focuses on problems, you begin to see life as stressful and overwhelming. But there is a critical misunderstanding here. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. This distinction may seem subtle, but it is one of the most important realizations you can make. Because the moment you recognize that thoughts are something you experience rather than something you are, you create separation. And in that separation, you gain control. Without this separation, every thought has power over you. With it, thoughts become something you can evaluate, question, and even ignore. This is the beginning of awareness. Awareness is not about stopping thoughts. That is neither possible nor necessary. The mind will continue to produce thoughts as long as you are alive. The goal is not silence, but clarity. Clarity comes from observation. When a thought appears, instead of immediately reacting, you notice it. You ask yourself whether it is based on evidence or assumption. You examine whether it is helpful or harmful. You consider whether it reflects reality or simply a conditioned response. This process may feel slow at first, but over time it becomes natural. And as it becomes natural, something interesting happens. Your thoughts begin to lose their intensity, not because they disappear, but because you no longer treat them as absolute truth. The same applies to emotions. Emotions are often experienced as overwhelming because they feel immediate and powerful. Anger can feel explosive. Anxiety can feel consuming. Sadness can feel heavy and persistent. In those moments, it can seem as though the emotion is defining your entire reality. But emotions, like thoughts, are temporary. They arise, they reach a peak, and they fade. The problem is not the emotion itself. The problem is the way you respond to it. When you resist an emotion, it tends to intensify. When you suppress it, it often returns later with greater force. When you react impulsively, it can create consequences that extend far beyond the original feeling. But when you observe an emotion without immediate reaction, its nature begins to change. Instead of being something that controls you, it becomes something you experience. For example, if you feel anxious and immediately try to escape that feeling, your mind interprets anxiety as something dangerous. This reinforces the cycle. But if you allow yourself to feel the anxiety without resistance while observing it, you begin to see that it is simply a sensation. It has physical components: a faster heartbeat, tension in the body, a certain pattern of thoughts. But it is not permanent. It does not define you. It is something passing through you. This understanding reduces its power. The same applies to anger. If you react immediately when you feel anger, you amplify it. You say things you may later regret. You act in ways that damage relationships. But if you pause and observe the anger, even for a few seconds, you create a gap. In that gap, you have a choice. You can choose whether to express the emotion constructively or let it pass without causing harm. This ability to create space between feeling and reaction is one of the most valuable skills you can develop, because it transforms your experience. Instead of being controlled by every emotional wave, you become stable. And stability is essential for happiness. Not the kind of happiness that depends on everything going perfectly, but the kind that remains even when things are uncertain. When your internal state is stable, external events lose their ability to disturb you deeply. You still experience life fully. You still feel joy, excitement, and even pain, but you are not constantly thrown off balance. You recover more quickly. You maintain clarity even in difficult situations. This creates a different relationship with life. Instead of constantly reacting, you begin to respond. Reaction is immediate and unconscious. Response is deliberate and aware. Reaction is driven by past conditioning. Response is guided by present understanding. This shift changes everything. Because once you begin responding instead of reacting, your actions become aligned with your values rather than your impulses. And alignment creates a sense of integrity. You feel more consistent within yourself. Your decisions feel clearer. Your behavior becomes more intentional. This reduces internal conflict. And when internal conflict decreases, peace increases. This is one of the foundations of happiness. Not constant pleasure, not endless excitement, but a steady sense of inner balance. However, developing awareness is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process. Your mind will still produce negative thoughts. You will still experience difficult emotions. You will still face situations that challenge your stability. The difference is that now you have a way to navigate them. Instead of being overwhelmed, you observe. Instead of reacting blindly, you pause. Instead of believing every thought, you question. This does not make life perfect, but it makes it manageable, and more importantly, it makes it meaningful. Because when you are aware, you are truly present. You are not lost in constant mental noise. You are not consumed by imagined futures or unresolved pasts. You are engaged with what is happening now. And in that presence, something subtle but powerful emerges, a sense of completeness. Not because everything is ideal, but because you are no longer disconnected from your own experience. You are fully there. And that is where happiness begins to take root, not as a temporary state, but as a stable foundation that grows stronger with awareness. Because the more you understand your mind, the less it controls you. And the less it controls you, the freer you become. And in that freedom, you finally begin to experience what you have been searching for all along. Pain is a natural part of life. Loss, failure, rejection, uncertainty, these experiences are unavoidable. Every human being encounters them in different forms and at different intensities. Trying to eliminate pain entirely is not only unrealistic, it creates a deeper problem. Because when you expect life to be free of discomfort, every difficulty feels like something has gone wrong. This expectation turns normal experiences into sources of frustration. A challenge becomes a burden. A delay becomes an irritation. A mistake becomes a personal failure. Instead of seeing these events as part of life, you begin to resist them, and that resistance amplifies your suffering. There is an important distinction to understand here. Pain is what happens to you. Suffering is how you respond to what happens to you. Pain is often immediate and unavoidable. Suffering is extended and created by the mind. For example, losing an opportunity may create immediate disappointment. That is natural. But the mind often continues the experience long after the event has passed. It replays the situation, imagines different outcomes, assigns blame, and creates narratives about what this loss means. I am not capable. I always fail. This should not have happened. These thoughts add layers to the original pain, and those layers are what create suffering. Without them, the pain would pass more quickly. This does not mean you should ignore your emotions or pretend that difficult experiences do not matter. It means you must recognize the role your mind plays in extending them. Most suffering is not caused by the event itself, but by the interpretation of the event. And interpretation is something you can change. When something negative happens, the mind immediately tries to make sense of it. It looks for meaning, causes, and implications. This process is automatic, but it is not always accurate. The mind tends to favor negative interpretations. It assumes the worst, exaggerates consequences, and personalizes outcomes. This is a survival mechanism. It evolved to detect threats and prepare for danger. But in modern life, it often misfires, turning ordinary challenges into sources of intense stress. If you are not aware of this tendency, you will accept these interpretations as truth, and when you accept them, your emotional response becomes stronger. But when you introduce awareness, something changes. You begin to question the initial interpretation. Instead of immediately concluding that a setback defines your ability, you consider other possibilities. Maybe the timing was not right. Maybe there were external factors. Maybe it is part of a larger process that you cannot yet see. This does not eliminate pain, but it prevents unnecessary suffering. because you are no longer adding layers of negative meaning to the experience. This approach requires mental discipline. It is easy to fall into familiar patterns of thinking. It is easy to assume that every negative event has a negative implication. But with practice, you can train your mind to respond differently. You can learn to see challenges as information rather than judgment. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What can I learn from this?" This shift changes your relationship with difficulty. Challenges become opportunities for growth rather than threats to your identity. Failure becomes feedback rather than proof of inadequacy. Uncertainty becomes a space for possibility rather than a source of fear. This does not make life easy, but it makes it constructive. Because instead of being stuck in resistance, you move into adaptation. And adaptation is where resilience is built. Resilience is the ability to recover from difficulty without losing your sense of balance. It is not about avoiding hardship, but about navigating it effectively. People who are resilient do not have fewer problems. They have a different relationship with problems. They do not interpret every setback as a personal failure. They do not allow temporary difficulties to define their entire experience. They maintain perspective. Perspective is one of the most powerful tools for maintaining happiness. When you lose perspective, small issues feel overwhelming. Minor inconveniences feel significant. Temporary situations feel permanent. Your mind narrows its focus and amplifies what is wrong. But when you maintain perspective, you see the larger picture. You recognize that most problems are temporary. You understand that situations evolve. You remember that you have faced challenges before and adapted. This broader view reduces emotional intensity. It creates space for calm thinking. And calm thinking leads to better decisions. Another important aspect of suffering is resistance. When something happens that you do not want, your immediate reaction is often to resist it. You mentally argue with reality. You think about how things should be different. You replay the situation, wishing it had unfolded another way. This resistance creates tension, because reality does not change based on your thoughts. The more you resist what has already happened, the more energy you waste. Acceptance, in this context, does not mean approval. It means acknowledging reality as it is. This distinction is important. You can accept that something has happened without agreeing that it is good. You can recognize a situation without liking it. Acceptance simply means you stop fighting what already exists. And when you stop fighting reality, you free up energy. Energy that can be used to respond effectively. Instead of being stuck in frustration, you can focus on what can be done next. This shift from resistance to acceptance is one of the most powerful changes you can make, because it moves you from a state of helplessness to a state of action. It allows you to engage with life as it is, rather than as you wish it to be, and in doing so, it reduces unnecessary suffering. There is also a deeper layer to suffering that is often overlooked. Attachment. Attachment is the belief that certain outcomes, people, or conditions are necessary for your happiness. When you become attached, you create dependency. Your emotional state becomes tied to something external. If that thing changes, your stability is affected. For example, if your happiness depends entirely on a specific relationship, any uncertainty in that relationship creates anxiety. If it depends on a certain level of success, any setback creates distress. Attachment amplifies suffering because it increases the stakes of every situation. Everything begins to feel more significant, more fragile. But when you reduce attachment, something changes. You still care. You still value things. But you are not dependent on them for your sense of well-being. This creates freedom. You can engage fully without fear of loss controlling you. You can appreciate without clinging. You can experience without constantly trying to control outcomes. This does not mean detachment in the sense of indifference. It means balanced involvement. You are present, engaged, and invested, but not emotionally trapped. This balance is essential for sustainable happiness. Because life is constantly changing. People change. Circumstances change. Opportunities change. If your happiness depends on things staying the same, you will constantly feel unstable. But if your happiness comes from within, external changes become easier to navigate. You adapt without losing yourself. You experience without becoming overwhelmed. You move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. This is the art of reducing suffering. Not by eliminating pain, but by changing your relationship with it. Not by controlling every outcome, but by developing the ability to respond effectively. Not by avoiding difficulty, but by growing through it. And as you begin to practice this, you will notice something subtle but powerful. Your baseline begins to shift. You are less reactive, less anxious, less overwhelmed. You recover more quickly from setbacks. You maintain clarity in situations that once disturbed you. And gradually, without forcing it, a sense of calm begins to emerge. Not because life has become perfect, but because you are no longer creating additional suffering on top of what is already there. This calm is not dramatic. It does not come with intensity or excitement. But it is stable, and that stability is the foundation of real happiness. Because happiness is not found in a life without problems. It is found in a mind that knows how to navigate them. Chapter 5. If there is one force that silently destroys happiness more consistently than failure, loss, or uncertainty, it is comparison. Comparison operates quietly, often unnoticed, yet it has the power to reshape how you feel about your entire life within seconds. You can be content, focused, and at peace, and then one glance at someone else's success, lifestyle, or progress can create a sudden sense of insufficiency. Nothing in your reality has changed, but your perception has. This is the danger of comparison. It does not require real loss to create dissatisfaction. It only requires contrast. The human mind is wired to evaluate. It constantly measures, analyzes, and ranks. In early human environments, this ability helped individuals understand their position within a group, assess threats, and adapt for survival. But in the modern world, this same mechanism often works against you. Because now, instead of comparing yourself to a small group, you are exposed to thousands of lives, achievements, and curated realities on a daily basis. And most of what you see is not neutral. It is filtered, selected, and presented in a way that emphasizes success and hides struggle. When you compare your full reality to someone else's highlight, the result is almost always distortion. You begin to feel behind, even if you are progressing. You begin to feel inadequate, even if you are capable. You begin to feel dissatisfied, even if your life is objectively stable. This is because comparison shifts your focus. Instead of noticing what you have, your mind begins to fixate on what you lack. And once the mind enters that mode, it becomes difficult to appreciate anything. Because there is always more that you do not have. There is always someone doing better in some aspect of life. More successful, more attractive, more recognized, more advanced. If your sense of happiness depends on being ahead, you are placing yourself in an unwinnable position. Because the scale has no endpoint, there is no final level where comparison stops. This creates a continuous state of psychological pressure. You are not just living your life. You are measuring it constantly. And measurement changes experience. When you measure everything, you reduce life to evaluation. Moments are no longer simply experienced. They are judged. Am I doing well enough? Is this good enough? How does this compare? These questions create tension because they shift your attention away from the present moment and into abstract evaluation. And when you are not present, you cannot feel genuine happiness. You are too busy analyzing. Another problem with comparison is that it distorts your understanding of progress. Progress is personal. It depends on your starting point, your circumstances, your priorities, and your values. But when you compare yourself to others, you ignore these variables. You assume that their timeline should match yours. You assume that their achievements define your standards. This creates unrealistic expectations. And unrealistic expectations lead to dissatisfaction. Because no matter how much you improve, it does not feel sufficient when measured against someone else's path. This is especially dangerous because it removes a sense of ownership from your life. Instead of defining success for yourself, you begin to adopt definitions from others. And those definitions may not align with what truly matters to you. You may find yourself chasing goals that look impressive but feel empty. You may achieve things that earn recognition but do not bring fulfillment. Because they were never your goals to begin with. They were borrowed. Comparison also affects your relationships. Instead of appreciating people for who they are, you begin to evaluate them based on how they fit into your mental hierarchy. You compare relationships, lifestyles, and experiences, which creates subtle dissatisfaction even in areas that once felt meaningful. Gratitude weakens, and without gratitude, happiness cannot sustain. Because gratitude anchors your attention in what is present and valuable. Comparison pulls your attention toward what is absent and desired. These two states cannot coexist strongly at the same time. Where comparison dominates, gratitude fades. And where gratitude fades, dissatisfaction grows. This does not mean you should never observe others or learn from them. Observation can be useful. It can provide insight, inspiration, and perspective. But there is a difference between learning and comparing. Learning is focused on growth. Comparison is focused on judgment. When you learn, you ask, what can I take from this? When you compare, you ask, where do I stand? The first leads to progress. The second leads to pressure. To reduce the negative impact of comparison, you must first become aware of when it is happening. Because it often occurs automatically. You scroll through social media, see someone's achievement, and instantly your mind creates a narrative. They are ahead. I am behind. They are doing better. I am not doing enough. These thoughts appear quickly and feel convincing, but they are not objective. They are interpretations. And, like all interpretations, they can be questioned. When you notice yourself comparing, pause. Ask yourself whether the comparison is accurate. Are you seeing the full picture of the other person's life, or just a small, curated part? Are you considering your own unique circumstances, or ignoring them? Are you measuring something that actually matters to you, or something that only appears important? These questions create clarity. They interrupt the automatic process. And in that interruption, you regain control. Another important shift is redefining progress. Instead of measuring your life against others, measure it against your past. Are you improving compared to where you were before? Are you learning, growing, and developing in ways that matter to you? This creates a sense of direction that is grounded and realistic, because it is based on your own journey, not someone else's. When you focus on personal progress, something changes. Your motivation becomes internal. You are no longer driven by the need to outperform others. You are driven by the desire to improve yourself. This type of motivation is more stable. It does not fluctuate based on what others are doing. It remains consistent because it is aligned with your own values. Values play a crucial role here. If you do not clearly define what matters to you, you will be influenced by what matters to others. And in a world full of noise, that influence can become overwhelming. You may start prioritizing visibility over meaning, speed over depth, recognition over fulfillment. But when you define your values, you create a filter. You can evaluate opportunities, goals, and decisions based on whether they align with what you truly care about. This reduces the impact of comparison because you are no longer trying to match every external standard. You are following a specific direction, your direction. This creates confidence, not the loud, external kind that seeks validation, but a quiet, internal confidence that comes from alignment. You know why you are doing what you are doing. You understand your path. And that understanding reduces the need to constantly look around. There is also a deeper realization that changes how you view comparison entirely. Everyone is on a different timeline, different starting points, different challenges, different opportunities, different priorities. Comparing two lives without considering these differences is not just inaccurate, it is meaningless. It is like comparing two journeys without knowing where they started or where they are going. Once you understand this, comparison begins to lose its power. Because you realize that there is no universal standard. There is no single path that defines success. There are only individual paths, each shaped by unique circumstances. This realization creates space. Space to focus on your own life. Space to appreciate your own progress. Space to experience moments without constantly evaluating them. And in that space, something important begins to grow. Contentment. Contentment is not complacency. It does not mean you stop improving or aiming higher. It means you are not in a constant state of dissatisfaction while you do. You can strive without feeling lacking. You can improve without feeling behind. You can grow without constantly comparing. This balance is essential for happiness because it allows you to move forward without losing your sense of peace. And that is the goal. Not to eliminate ambition, but to remove the unnecessary pressure that comes from comparison, so that your progress becomes meaningful and your happiness becomes sustainable. Chapter 6. If comparison quietly drains happiness, then attachment silently controls it. Attachment is not always obvious. It does not announce itself loudly, and it often disguises itself as care, ambition, or love. But beneath these forms, attachment operates with a simple rule. It tells you that your happiness depends on something outside of you. It could be a person, an outcome, a status, a belief about how life should unfold. Whatever form it takes, the structure is the same. You begin to believe that without this specific thing, you cannot feel complete. At first, this may seem harmless. You work toward a goal because you believe achieving it will make you happy. You invest emotionally in a relationship because it brings meaning to your life. You build a vision of how your future should look, and you move toward it with determination. There is nothing inherently wrong with any of this. The problem begins when your sense of stability becomes dependent on it. When the presence of something makes you feel secure, and the absence of it makes you feel unstable, attachment has taken hold. This creates vulnerability. Not the kind of vulnerability that allows openness and connection, but the kind that ties your emotional state to conditions you cannot fully control. Because everything outside you is subject to change. People change. Circumstances shift. Outcomes do not always match expectations. Even your own desires evolve over time. If your happiness depends on things remaining a certain way, you will constantly feel tension. You may not always notice it, but it exists beneath the surface. A subtle fear of loss, a quiet need for things to stay as they are, an ongoing effort to control situations, people, or outcomes. This tension prevents true peace, because peace requires stability, and stability cannot exist when your emotional state is tied to unstable variables. One of the clearest examples of attachment can be seen in expectations. Expectations are mental representations of how you believe things should happen. They are formed based on past experiences, desires, and assumptions. You expect people to behave in certain ways. You expect situations to unfold according to your plans. You expect results to match your efforts. When reality aligns with these expectations, you feel satisfied. When it does not, you feel disappointed, frustrated, or even angry. The intensity of your reaction is directly related to the strength of your attachment. If you are lightly attached, you adapt easily. You adjust your thinking and move forward. But if you are strongly attached, even small deviations from expectation can feel significant. This is why two people can experience the same situation and react completely differently. One remains calm. The other becomes disturbed. The difference is not the event. The difference is the level of attachment. Attachment narrows your perspective. It makes you focus on a single desired outcome and ignore other possibilities. It creates rigidity in your thinking. Instead of adapting to reality, you try to force reality to match your expectations. And when reality does not comply, which it often does not, you experience frustration. This frustration is not caused by the situation itself. It is caused by the gap between what is and what you believe should be. The larger the gap, the greater the discomfort. This is why reducing attachment is essential for happiness. Not eliminating goals or desires, but loosening the emotional dependence on specific outcomes. This creates flexibility. Flexibility allows you to engage with life without becoming rigid. It allows you to pursue goals while remaining open to different paths. It allows you to care without becoming controlled by what you care about. This balance is difficult, but powerful. It means you can give your best effort without tying your identity to the result. You can invest in relationships without losing yourself in them. You can plan for the future without becoming anxious about every possible deviation. This is often misunderstood as detachment. But detachment does not mean indifference. It does not mean you stop caring or withdraw from life. It means you change the way you care. Instead of caring with dependency, you care with awareness. Instead of needing things to be a certain way, you appreciate them as they are. This shift transforms your experience. For example, in relationships, attachment often creates fear. Fear of losing the person. Fear of being rejected. Fear of not being valued in the same way. These fears influence behavior. They create overthinking, insecurity, and sometimes control. But when you reduce attachment, the relationship changes. You are still invested. You still value the connection, but you are not driven by fear. You allow the other person to be themselves. You express yourself more honestly. You are less focused on maintaining the relationship at all costs and more focused on the quality of the connection. This creates healthier dynamics. Because relationships built on attachment often become restrictive, relationships built on balanced involvement become supportive. The same principle applies to goals. When you are overly attached to a specific outcome, your entire sense of progress becomes dependent on achieving it. If you succeed, you feel temporarily elevated. If you fail, you feel significantly lowered. This creates emotional volatility. But when you focus on the process rather than the outcome, something changes. Your sense of progress becomes internal. You measure effort, learning, and growth rather than just results. This creates consistency, because effort is within your control. Results are not always. This shift reduces anxiety. You are no longer constantly worried about whether things will go exactly as planned. You are focused on what you can do in the present. And this focus improves performance. Because when you are not overwhelmed by the fear of outcomes, your attention becomes sharper. Your decisions become clearer. Your actions become more effective. Another important aspect of attachment is identity. People often attach themselves to roles, labels, and self-concepts. I am successful. I am intelligent. I am respected. These identities can feel positive, but they can also create pressure. Because once you attach to an identity, you feel the need to protect it. Any situation that challenges it becomes a threat. If something goes wrong, it is not just an event. It feels like a personal failure. This creates defensiveness. You may avoid risks that could expose weaknesses. You may resist feedback that could improve you. You may become overly concerned with how others perceive you. All of this limits growth. But when you loosen attachment to identity, you become more adaptable. You are no longer trying to prove something constantly. You are open to learning. You can accept mistakes without feeling defined by them. You can evolve without resistance. This creates freedom. Freedom to explore, to change, to improve without the weight of constant self-protection. And this freedom contributes directly to happiness because it reduces internal pressure. It allows you to engage with life more openly. Reducing attachment does not happen instantly. It requires awareness. You must notice where your emotional reactions are strongest, where you feel the most fear, the most frustration, the most need for control. These are indicators of attachment. Instead of trying to eliminate these feelings immediately, you begin by understanding them. You ask yourself why this particular outcome matters so much. What belief is behind it? What you think will happen if it does not go your way. This process reveals the structure of your attachment. And once you see it clearly, it begins to weaken, because attachment relies on unconscious belief. When you bring it into awareness, it loses some of its influence. Over time, you begin to relate to things differently. You still have goals, but they do not define you. You still value people, but you are not controlled by the fear of losing them. You still make plans, but you are not disturbed when they change. This creates stability. Not because life becomes predictable, but because you are no longer dependent on it being predictable, and this stability is essential. Because happiness cannot exist in a state of constant emotional dependency. It requires a foundation that is not easily shaken. That foundation is built when you shift from attachment to awareness, from control to acceptance, from dependency to balance. And when this shift becomes part of how you live, something changes at a deeper level. You begin to experience life more fully, without constantly trying to hold on to it, without constantly fearing its changes. You become present. And in that presence, happiness is no longer something fragile. It becomes something steady, something that remains, even as everything else continues to change. Chapter 7. If attachment binds your happiness to external conditions, then control determines how stable that happiness can become. Most people underestimate the role of control in their emotional life. They believe their feelings are a natural response to circumstances. something happens, and they feel a certain way. If the situation is good, they feel good. If it is bad, they feel bad. This pattern appears logical, and because it feels automatic, it is rarely questioned. But this assumption quietly removes responsibility. It suggests that your internal state is determined by external events. And if that is true, then your happiness will always be uncertain, because external events are unpredictable. People behave in ways you cannot fully control. Situations evolve in ways you cannot always anticipate. Outcomes depend on multiple variables, many of which are outside your influence. If your emotional state depends entirely on these factors, you will constantly feel unstable. This is where control becomes essential. Not control over everything that happens around you, but control over how you respond to what happens. This distinction is critical. Trying to control the external world leads to frustration. Trying to control your internal response leads to stability. But developing this kind of control requires understanding what is actually within your influence. Most people overestimate how much control they have over outcomes and underestimate how much control they have over their own mind. They spend energy trying to manage situations, people, and results, while neglecting the one area where control is most possible: their attention, their thoughts, their reactions. Your attention is one of the most powerful tools you have. Whatever you focus on expands in your experience. If you focus on problems, your mind begins to see more problems. If you focus on what is missing, your sense of lack increases. If you focus on negative possibilities, your anxiety grows. This does not mean problems do not exist. It means your perception of them is influenced by your focus. Two people can face the same situation and feel completely different simply because they are focusing on different aspects of it. One focuses on limitations. The other focuses on opportunities. One sees risk. The other sees potential. The situation is the same. The experience is different. This difference is created by attention. But attention is not always under conscious control. Your mind has a natural tendency to focus on what is wrong. This is known as negativity bias. It evolved to help humans detect threats and survive in dangerous environments. But in modern life, where immediate physical threats are less common, this bias often creates unnecessary stress. You may spend more time thinking about one negative comment than 10 positive ones. You may focus more on a single problem than multiple areas of stability in your life. You may anticipate what could go wrong more than what could go right. If you do not manage this tendency, it shapes your entire emotional experience. Your life may be balanced, but your perception becomes negative. And perception determines how you feel. This is why controlling your attention is so important. It allows you to direct your mental energy intentionally, rather than leaving it to automatic patterns. This does not mean ignoring problems or pretending everything is positive. It means choosing a balanced perspective, acknowledging challenges without becoming consumed by them, recognizing what is working while addressing what is not. This creates clarity, and clarity reduces unnecessary emotional intensity. Another aspect of control is your interpretation. Events themselves do not carry meaning. Meaning is assigned by the mind. The same situation can be interpreted in multiple ways. A delay can be seen as frustration or as extra time to prepare. A mistake can be seen as failure or as feedback. A challenge can be seen as a burden or as an opportunity for growth. These interpretations directly influence your emotional response. And while the initial interpretation may be automatic, it is not fixed. You can question it. You can reframe it. You can choose a perspective that is more constructive. This is not about forcing positivity. It is about recognizing that your first interpretation is not always the most accurate or helpful. By developing the habit of examining your interpretations, you gain control over your reactions. Instead of being pulled into emotional responses automatically, you create space for deliberate thinking. This space is where stability is built. Control also extends to your behavior. Your actions influence your emotional state more than you may realize. When you act impulsively, driven by immediate emotions, you often create outcomes that increase stress. You may say something in anger that damages a relationship. You may avoid a responsibility due to discomfort, which creates pressure later. You may engage in habits that provide short-term relief but long-term dissatisfaction. These actions reinforce negative cycles. But when you act with awareness, your behavior becomes aligned with your long-term well-being. You respond rather than react. You choose actions that support stability rather than undermine it. This creates consistency, and consistency strengthens your sense of control. Because you begin to trust yourself, you know that even in difficult situations, you can respond in a way that aligns with your values. This trust reduces anxiety, because uncertainty becomes less threatening when you are confident in your ability to handle it. Another critical element of control is discipline. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction, but in reality, it is a form of self-respect. It is the ability to act in your best interest, even when it is uncomfortable. Without discipline, your behavior is driven by immediate impulses. You do what feels easy in the moment, even if it creates problems later. This leads to instability, because your actions are inconsistent. And inconsistency creates unpredictable outcomes. With discipline, you create structure. You develop habits that support your mental and emotional well-being. You manage your time effectively. You take care of your physical health. You engage in activities that strengthen your mind. These behaviors may not always feel rewarding in the moment, but they create long-term stability. And stability is essential for happiness. Because happiness is not just an emotional state. It is a condition supported by your daily actions. Your routines, your habits, your choices all contribute to your baseline experience. If your lifestyle is chaotic, your mind will reflect that chaos. If your lifestyle is structured and intentional, your mind becomes more stable. This connection between behavior and emotional state is often overlooked. People try to change how they feel without changing how they live. But feelings are influenced by actions. If you consistently engage in behaviors that create stress, distraction, or imbalance, your emotional state will reflect that. But if you engage in behaviors that promote clarity, focus, and well-being, your emotional state begins to shift. This is where control becomes practical. It is not just a concept. It is something you apply daily. In how you manage your attention, in how you interpret situations, in how you respond to emotions, in how you structure your behavior. Each of these areas contributes to your overall experience. And while you cannot control everything, you can influence these aspects consistently. Over time, this influence becomes significant. Your reactions become more measured. Your thoughts become clearer. Your behavior becomes more aligned. And your emotional state becomes more stable. This does not mean you will never feel negative emotions. You will still experience stress, frustration, and uncertainty. But these experiences will not dominate you. They will pass more quickly. They will have less impact. Because you are no longer completely controlled by them. This creates a sense of empowerment. Not the kind that comes from controlling the world, but the kind that comes from understanding yourself. You realize that while you cannot dictate every outcome, you can shape your experience. You can choose how much attention to give certain thoughts. You can decide how to interpret situations. You can control your actions, even when emotions are strong. This realization changes your relationship with life. You stop feeling like a passive participant. You become an active contributor to your own state. And this shift is essential, because happiness is not something that happens to you. It is something you build. Through awareness, through discipline, through consistent control over your internal processes. And as this control strengthens, your dependence on external conditions weakens. You become less affected by fluctuations, more stable in uncertainty, more grounded in your own experience. And from that stability, a deeper form of happiness begins to emerge, not dependent on outcomes, not tied to constant stimulation, but rooted in your ability to remain balanced, regardless of what life presents.